before.
They all know to chat and send their questions. We'll be keeping an eye on that.
Yes, as Lucy is talking, please feel free to send questions for her in the chat box. We'll be doing this like we did before, where each speaker will give a little presentation and then we'll have some time for Q&A with each of them. So with that, Lucy, you want to take it away?
Yep. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. I'm hoping that I can get this to share my screen. I've had nothing but hold on, problems with Zoom lately, which is more than fitting. Let's see, that doesn't seem to want to, right, here I go. All right, so I'll take about, try to go through this in about 5 minutes, but it's really a delight to have this chance to share some tips with you all. As Regina mentioned, the Digital Civil Society Lab has actually been arguing for well over a decade that we're all digital now, and certainly these last couple of weeks have made people very aware of how much your work depends on the digital tools you use. So if you've been following the news, you know that there's lots of questions about the right video conferencing software. And let me just start by saying the Digital Civil Society and the organizational security community globally generally makes the point, the key point here is that the tools matter, but what you train your people to do matters more. That every single off-the-shelf commercial option you have for any of the functions your organization is doing now, whether it's video conferencing, which we'll talk about today, or cloud storage, or collaborative documents, or messaging, which I'm happy to come back to. If you're using commercial software, you're going to have security and privacy concerns. None of the tools are going to magically solve your problems. So the most important thing you can do in any situation for any of these tools is actually to train your people on the software. So it's an ongoing process, because as you also may be aware, the actual default settings and what you can buy when you're buying something off the shelf change all the time. But really what's most important here is training people on the software, setting proper expectations and defaults are key no matter what choice you're going to make. Now your choices are usually going to be based on cost, familiarity, and the security concerns of your organization, or the safety concerns. And there's really two kinds of those concerns. There are just the basic safety of the people and the information that work at your organization. So your staff, your board, your volunteers, and the information you're sharing among them is one set of kind of operational information, we'll call it. And then there's all the information that gets generated or created when you're actually delivering programs and services, which most of you are probably now doing with more dependence on digital tools than you might have been before. And so there are often two very different levels of safety concerns there. So for example, if you're a counseling organization or an after-school tutoring program, or any kind of organization where the program itself might involve video conferencing, the conversations that you'd have with your beneficiaries, with your community partners, that's a level, there's a level of protection and safety there that's in general going to be higher, your concern for it should be higher than what you might decide you need to use and compromise when you're having conversations among staff and volunteers. But in all situations with any of these tools, you are going to be making compromises on what might happen with the information you're sharing online. That's the nature of being dependent on digital tools. That's actually why the Digital Civil Society Lab exists. What matters, but there's no magic answer, and it really comes down to how you train your staff and what you set as your own organizational norms and defaults. We've generated for you, and you can actually access this document right now on the website, a quick guide to major video conferencing software that people are using. So Zoom and Jitsi and Meet and I can't remember what the fourth one is. I'm not actually looking at the document. that'll go into some detail on each of these 3 questions. But in order to be most helpful, what we wanted to do was simplify this down to the 3 key questions you want to ask when you're trying to make a decision about choosing one software program over another. And I'm going to walk through those 3 questions pretty briefly. They actually apply not just to video conferencing, but to many of the other tools you'll be picking. So the first question is, are your conversations protected from third parties outside of your organization? The second part is your meeting host in control? And the third is about your personal privacy. So let me actually introduce a metaphor here that I found to be helpful. The digital software that you're using, so the Zoom that we're using right now, that's a video conferencing app, it's essentially acting like our landlord for the moment. We are having this conversation in Zoom's real estate, in Zoom's room. They own the conversation we're having right now. So if that's helpful for you to think about them in that way, and it makes them tangible and physical, and you can imagine your landlord, then let me walk you through each of these 3 questions and how it might relate to if you were actually if we were meeting in person. So is your conversation protected from third parties? While we're having this conversation on a Zoom at this moment on Zoom's platform, and they're functioning as our landlord, the thing to realize is the landlord is listening. This conversation is happening in such a way that the landlord is listening. And so what you want to look for, if you don't want the landlord to understand what you're saying, because they are listening, is you're looking for something that's end-to-end encrypted. That means that it's like your landlord might be sitting in the room listening to our conversation, but she doesn't speak the same language that we're speaking, and she doesn't have any way to translate it. So if you're really concerned about the content of the conversation itself being unintelligible to your landlord, or to anyone like the authorities that might subpoena a copy of the conversation from your landlord, then you want a program that's end-to-end encrypted, because it essentially puts the conversation into a language that no one else can access. So that's the first question. The second question is your meeting host in control. And when Aaron was setting this up and the folks at CNM were setting this up, they've all kinds of controls built into Zoom about who can mute whom and who can control the screen. And can people come into the meeting prior to you actually setting it up? And how do you kick people out? How do you prevent people from taking control of the screen and sharing racist or pornographic images, a kind of network harassment that's gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of weeks, particularly on Zoom. So what you're thinking about here in terms of the metaphor of the landlord is, does your landlord hold the key to who can be in and out of the meeting, or do you hold the key? How much of the control over how the meeting happens in this space is available to the actual host? And on the document that's linked at the bottom, we rate the 4 different programs according to this, so that you can figure out how much control you have on the virtual key to who comes and goes from the conversation you're trying to have. And finally, the last key question here is about the privacy of the people participating on the call. In the digital version of this, what you're concerned about here is, to what degree is the conversation you're having in this particular software program, so we're talking on Zoom, so to what degree is the conversation we're having on Zoom potentially connecting the contents of this conversation and the data on all of you who've participated in the conversation, your email and your sign-in information, for example? To what degree is Zoom sharing that information with other entities? So with other apps, for example, and recently it's come out that in versions of Zoom, it's possible for the data to be connected to LinkedIn and the data to be connected to Facebook. So here, and you probably don't want that to be happening. Here in the landlord metaphor, the physical version example here is, your landlord's in the room, she's listening in, she's taking notes. What is she doing with those notes? Is she able to walk out of the room with them and make money off of them? Because that's the physical equivalent of using a program like Zoom or any of the other apps that's connecting your conversation and the information that's collected to other apps on your phone. So if the landlord metaphor is helpful, it's a way to think about how you would work through those 3 questions as you were actually making decisions. So let me quickly show you what we've created that's available at this link that's at the bottom. You can download this document. It guides you through 4 different very popular video conferencing service apps. It gives them high, medium, and low ratings on safety in particular regard to each of those 3 questions. And it also breaks them out by price and the different tiers that some of the programs offer. So that we hope it's helpful. We pulled it together just for this meeting. And what I'd like to ask you is as you access that, as you think about it, or if we have time on this call, is to let us know what other types of guidance would be helpful for you as you're becoming familiar with doing all of your work and the digital dependencies are really coming clear. In other words, is it video conferencing? Is it cloud software? Is it collaborative documents? Is it messaging services? If this tool is helpful to you, let us know what other tools you'd like us to review and we can create those and share them quickly. We're also, as Regina mentioned, part of this upgrade initiative, and we'll be planning more and more learning events like this over the next several months. So let us know what kind of learning support would be helpful. You can use this email that you see here on the screen. I've just put some sample questions for you to think about. CNM has this whole slide deck, so you can get it from them. This, by the way, is the website where you can find all the existing resources. It's digitalimpact.io at the toolkit. It has a lot of these existing kind of resources. And then finally, these are our great partners in the Upgrade Initiative, which we hope to be able to tell you much more about in the coming weeks and months. So I'll stop there, go over to check the screen for any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was very helpful and informative. A few questions are definitely showing up. I definitely have a few questions now too. I found it really interesting that we're, discussing sort of all of the security issues here on a platform with questionable security.
Yep.
But definitely one of the questions I think is about demystifying encryption a little bit, because there's varying levels. You talked about end-to-end encryption. Most platforms, including Zoom, have a little lock that's on it somewhere. And I think that lulls people into a false sense of security. So can you distinguish a little bit more about kind of the levels of encryption and how people can interpret those little locks that they're seeing?
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't actually depend on the lock. What's become clear, particularly with Zoom, is that they're marketing themselves as encrypted, and they're not. So in the document that I shared, you'll see the different encryption levels on the other services, but essentially there's only really one. There's a paid tier of WebEx that you can use as an encrypted service, where it will actually really lock down the data, and what it does is it encodes it into a bunch of garbage code that you can't reinterpret. But when you do that, it actually shuts off several of the other functionalities that people need. So the short answer to the question is right now at a cost that most nonprofits are going to be able to afford, there aren't really good encrypted options. And so the better way to do it, the better way to take advantage of that comes down to, if you can, depending on what you're using it for, say you're using Zoom for a board meeting or for staff training, you will want to start habituating, coming up with some norms for your own communication about what kind of information you will and won't share in these rooms, because they are being listened in on. There just really isn't a good encrypted option for most nonprofits at this point. So instead, what you have to do is be careful about what you say. It's like returning to your teenage years and talking code in front of your parents.
I think that makes sense, and kind of gets to my next question too, for knowing that organizations, some are dealing with more confidential information than others. And at CNM, we've been going through the same questions about sort of what kinds of conversations are okay on what platforms, internal, company data versus client data, and knowing that there are people out there that have HIPAA concerns and things like, does end-to-end encryption equate HIPAA compliant, or sort of like, how do we line up all of these various systems?
Yeah, no. I think the answer to that second question about HIPAA compliance and end-to-end encryption is probably no. Now, I'm not an expert on HIPAA. There are, but we can definitely, I can get you some information on that, and I'm happy to provide that. But I would not immediately equate end-to-end encryption with HIPAA. But you're absolutely right. You're going to have very different levels of safety concerns about, perhaps the actual, to use my earlier example, the contents of the actual counseling session versus a conversation with staff about scheduling how to rearrange schedules to accommodate the remote work. There's different levels of safety there, and they're going to require different norms. The challenge for those of you doing program services now in this fashion, where you have important safety concerns, is, unfortunately, I think, unless you've got access to the kind of financial resources that can buy those high tier systems, the best you can do is develop a clear set of norms and guidelines with the participants in the room at the beginning of each conversation. Is to say, this is like we were having this conversation, out on the sidewalk, or in an open plan office, or where other people can hear us. And to train the moderator or the host, I guess, to help make sure that people understand that. I'm well aware that there are lots of groups that are continuing their work using Zoom platform, talking about very sensitive information, knowing that it's not encrypted, but to meet the other criteria of access and cost and familiarity, they've made that trade-off, and then they spend time in each conversation making sure, as much as you can, that people understand that this is not a secure place to have the conversation.
Yeah. Another question about cost. You were saying that like some of the programs have higher tiers where you can pay for end-to-end encryption. Is cost necessarily like correlated with levels of security, or are there more like open source alternatives that may be free or cheaper that may be more secure? Like, how do you think about those lining up?
Yeah, and it's not a one-to-one relationship that the more you pay, the better you get. It's definitely not the case in the software world. And that we did review Jitsi, which is an open source solution. In this case, what it provides you there is a great deal more control at your end, assuming you have someone you have access to on your team or on your board or among your volunteer corps who can actually manage those open source controls. The usual difference between, at this point in time, the general breakdown between open source tools and commercial tools is open source tools require, they're never as slick and easy to use. They're not, what's called the user interface and the user experience is not where the community has put its resources. So they're not as intuitive. You need somebody with a little more, in some cases, a lot more engineering talent. But it is possible to create your own, to kind of roll your own crypto, as it would be described, using an open source tool that won't cost you more in cash out front for the tool, but it costs you for access to that expertise unless you happen to have it in-house.
Yeah, I know that I've read through, a list of tools that you should be using, and then see one that sounds great, and then I click through and it lands on a GitHub page, and I'm like, oh, yeah, well, this is clearly going to be a bit more involved.
Exactly, and for most people, that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You may have mentioned this, that you provided the link and you're going to be working on kind of providing these recommendations for other tools alongside video conferencing platforms. But there was a question on sort of similar guidance for Slack and Microsoft Teams, and just, I think in general, everyone's kind of looking at this with fresh eyes, and now we're spending so much time on Zoom.
Yep.
But also, like, we've been using a lot of these tools that have not been that secure or have been sharing our information like this whole time. So kind of, in addition to the new tools we're using, just some of the ones that we've gotten so used to already, how do we approach those in this time?
Yep. Actually, with the same questions. What we're really trying, there's a couple, I've said at the beginning that there's nothing off the shelf that's not really expensive. And even there, you don't have a guarantee that's going to sort of design for your security needs. That's not what the companies are designing these tools for. And their business models don't actually incentivize them to solve our problems for us. So for all of these kinds of tools, some version of those 3 questions is going to come in handy for you. And that's what we'll be happy to create, because the sort of subtext of the 3 questions changes what you're talking about. But we're trying to write these things in ways that you could actually dig in and make your decision. Let me go to Slack in particular. Slack is not end-to-end encrypted. All your Slack chats, everything, all your dog pictures, all your recipes, and all of your board minutes, and all of your financials that you've been sharing via Slack are sitting on Slack servers. The other thing, what makes Slack so popular, one of the things that makes it so popular is you can integrate all those other services into it. So that right there should develop the muscle that's a quick signal to you. If it's easy to integrate Google or Zoom or anything else into Slack, or if the companies are making those connections really easy for you, which does in fact make it easy to work with, then right away that data is being shared across those platforms. So it's like you're meeting in that digital room, but you've left all the doors open. and yeah. You might be safe on the Slack side, and that's not true. But you've left the Google door open, and you've left the LinkedIn door open. And so the more connections there are, the more open doors there are. And again, it's going to come down, I'm going to sound like a broken record here. It comes down really to awareness and norms and training.
That makes a lot of sense. Just, you can't rely on the tech to solve all the problems for you.
It's absolutely,
that's not their incentive.
In almost all cases, not only is it not designed to solve these problems for us, the business models incentivize the companies to do other things. And that's why the free or paid trade-off, that's what you can look for in the free or paid trade-off, because the more you're using free tools, if they're not open source, if you're using a free version of a proprietary tool, then they are making money off of the data that they're gathering somewhere in the process of you using that tool. It's 99% sure that that's how they're keeping the product going.
Makes sense. No such thing as a free lunch.
Yep.
Awesome. I think we can wrap up the cyber security side of the discussion. I was told that the link that you provided might not be accessible right now. I posted it in the chat, and it looks like it might be broken.
Well, let me get that fixed. They were actually uploading a new version of the document, but and cool. Those slides, you can give the slides to everybody, and the digitalimpact.io, those things should work. If you have what I didn't put on the email? Well, email hello@digitalimpact if you can't get the PDF, and we'll fix that ASAP. I'm going to start multitasking and letting my other person know that.
Awesome. Yeah, if you can get an updated link while we're still on and post it in the chat, that'd be super helpful. But either way, we can follow up with a working link for everyone. Awesome. With that, we're going to switch gears and set up Mr. Paul over here, who's going to talk us through the payroll protection program in particular. You ready to go, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Welcome, everyone. And thanks so much for this time. I'm extremely excited about this new program that's been launched, and I want to spend a few minutes describing it, and then just go on a website where we can actually just walk through where you would sign up for this program. As part of the CARES Act last week, there was $350 billion released to small businesses and nonprofits. But the nonprofits have to take advantage of it. It's not going to just come to you. As part of that $350 billion, there is a key part of it that's released to the Paycheck Protection Program. It's abbreviated PPP. And if you're not aware of it, the main intent of this few minutes is to make you aware of it and to see if your nonprofit is eligible, or if other small businesses or nonprofits that you work with are eligible. I would love for you to investigate it with your banker or your lender. So that's kind of the overview. More specifically, and the reason I am so excited about this program is, first of all, it's a huge amount of money, $350 billion. The federal government is trying to spend that money in 3 months. The program literally ends June 30th of this year. So it's a 3-month program. It started today, literally started today, with applications coming in from businesses and from nonprofits. And the best part of the program from my standpoint is it's not just a loan. There's a number of programs that the Small Business Administration is offering. But why I'm incredibly excited about this opportunity is it's a loan that can be forgiven if you follow the rules. And the reason for that is, if you think about the basic program itself, the money is designed to keep individuals employed with their employer for the next couple of months. It's literally a stopgap because the nation is largely stopped, and that's preventing a lot of revenue from coming in. It's stopping a lot of people from doing their jobs. And we're seeing the tremendous unemployment spikes of last week and this week, and that's going to continue. One of the ways to try and defer that is to give organizations like yours basically 2 months of free payroll to maintain your operation, at least for those 2 months. So obviously there's an alternative of furloughing employees or letting employees go and having them go to unemployment, which has also been beefed up recently. But one alternative that a number of nonprofits are doing and a number of small businesses are doing is they're hanging on and retaining their employee base. This program allows you to more successfully hang on to your employees and certainly do that over the next couple of months. So if you are able to get the loan and spend that money on existing payroll, your loan can actually be forgiven. So it has this magical quality of turning from a loan to a grant if you follow the rules the right way. And that's why I'm so excited about this program. Let me talk about it a little bit just in terms of the size of the program, the size of the loan. For any participating organization, you look at the payroll that you've had for the past year. So you do need record keeping around actual payroll. And it's ideal if you have that for 2019 month by month. And if you have it for the months leading up to current, that's also very helpful. The way the regulation is written right now, the banks would take your total payroll for 2019, and they would include other elements to pay, things like vacation pay, any retirement that's been provided by the nonprofit. So there's a number of things that can be included in payroll. But the basic gist is you take that payroll and you divide it by 12. So they're looking at getting at the average monthly pay before this crisis hit. You can take your monthly pay times 2.5. So 2.5 is the magic number. So for example, if you look at the payroll for, let's say you're a relatively small nonprofit, a couple $100,000, and you look at your average monthly pay, you just take that 200,000 divided by 12, you get your number. I didn't pick a great example. Let's pick 240,000. Divided by 12, you have a $20,000 average monthly payroll. You're allowed to multiply that by 2.5. So the size of the loan that you could take out could be that 20 times 2.5. So you could take out a $50,000 loan. Now, here's the beautiful part of that. When you receive that loan from your bank, the intended purpose is to spend that on payroll for the next 2 months and on a few other business or your organization's related costs that can be covered. Rent, for instance, can be covered. Utilities can be covered. If you own the building, mortgage can be covered. So if the program is designed to keep your organization going for the 2 months after the loan, and they're hoping that the loan would come out in April or May. If you then spend the money in the appropriate ways, primarily on payroll, and you document that, you give that documentation back to the bank where you've received that loan. The bank has 60 days to review your documentation, and if approved, it will then forgive the loan for the amount that you have turned in. So it's a way of, in effect, getting 2 months of payroll paid by the federal government that wouldn't be available otherwise. And there's $350 billion available for small business and for nonprofits over the next 3 months. So that in effect is the overview of the program. In terms of the excitement that I have, it's palpable. There's no doubt that I want organizations to take advantage of it, but there's been a real split in who is trying to take advantage of this program, and that's what I want to address very much with this group here. I've talked to a dozen small business owners around the U.S. Who all have employees in the United States and are all desperately trying to hang on to those employees. So they have not laid them off, they've not furloughed them. Every single one of those small businesses is applying for one of these Paycheck Protection Program loans. And they're attempting to do it through their bank, and they've started that process or are trying to start that process today. When I talk to some of the very small businesses, a painter with 3 employees who's done absolutely no work over the past, let's say, month. Nonprofits who have not heard about this program, they are not hearing about it and they're not taking advantage of the program. And that to me is a huge missed opportunity that I would love to address. So I want to take us, if I can, quickly to the Small Business Administration. And actually, as I'm doing that, let me, let's see here. So, all windows. Oh, here it is, I believe. Let's share that one. Can you see it?
Yep, looking good.
Okay. So the, oh, and I'm on the Paycheck Protection Program. So this is all being supported by the Small Business Administration, the U.S. Small Business Administration, in conjunction with the Finance Department. So there's a little bit of tussling that's going on between the SBA and the Treasury Department, and that's causing a little bit of hiccups in the program at the beginning part of that program. But the actual program itself is being supported by the SBA. So within the SBA site, you can come to the actual Paycheck Protection Program page that we have right here. And there's wonderful high-level information around the details of forgiveness that we've been describing. They also do talk about it can be forgiven. Walk through, if I quickly here, I got to that page. Just make sure all of you can do this. If I go to sba.gov, well, they basically, their site has been taken over by this need right here to focus on small business through the coronavirus. So if I go to sba.gov and I go to learn more, I then have an ability to look at the very top link here is coronavirus funding options. Okay, how can I get funding support from the SBA during this crisis? Funding options here again, click here to learn more about what are these loans that I might take advantage of. And here are some basic options. Now, I've been primarily talking about this first option here because I think it's so powerful, the Paycheck Protection Program. There are 3 other lending opportunities that the SBA talks about. Those are going to be further addressed, I believe, by the center on Monday. You're going to have Ted come in and talk about all the different programs that the SBA is offering. The reason I'm so focused on the Paycheck Protection Program is it's a loan that can turn into a grant. Most of the others are flat out loans. And as you know, whether it's a nonprofit or a small business, you have to be just really careful with loans because you have to have an organization that can pay those back. So there's real strategic questions on, do you really want to take on additional debt? But the Paycheck Protection Program, if done correctly, has that magical ability to, in effect, turn into a grant. So here you're going to see a lot of different information, it will give you as much detail as you or your organization would want in terms of who can apply. And then the great thing is it takes you right down to the actual form. So let me just see here. So here actually, down under the loan details is the PPP borrower application form. And let me just take you to that really quickly. You can download it as a PDF. And here's the form. It's quite simple, 2 pages. There's a place right up here for 501c3 because you're, you are absolutely part of the target market here. You can see the breakout that we've just described, the average monthly payroll for, let's say, 2019 times 2.5. That gives you a number here, so a dollar number here, and then the number of employees that you have in your organization. So this is a very simple form to fill out. It's literally 2 pages. You come down here, you print and sign your name and make sure it's the representative who's legally representing that nonprofit. And then there's just a couple of pages of backup that go along with that. So that is literally the form that you fill out. Now, in terms of the immediate next steps, the most immediate next step is for you as a nonprofit to go talk to your bank. Because the banks are administering this program on behalf of the SBA. So nothing happens until you get to a lender. You can't get this on your own. So all of this is a conjunction with banks and credit unions. And there's going to be a lot of dust for the first few days because this has been so quick in getting up that the banks are really trying to figure out what the process is on their own. So there's some banks I've seen who are starting the process like B of A, but they're only starting it with their with customers that have deep relationships with them. I assume that will broaden out over the next few days. I do believe that East West Bank, for instance, locally is doing this program because I've seen their spreadsheets that ask folks to calculate their payroll. But there's a number of other banks that are taking a few days to digest all of this so they can take these loan applications going forward. But I will say that from the bankers that I've talked to, they're supporting the program, but this is a lot of work for them and it's a bit of a headache. And the only interest they can charge is 1%, which really wouldn't cover their costs. So they're primarily either not doing the program or they're going to focus on their existing customers first. So I want you to focus on the banking relationship that you currently have and go to them and ask them, how do I start this process? So that's it. I hope you can all take advantage of the program. It is particularly for those who want to maintain their employment over the next couple of months moving forward. And I hope this has been helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. You can kill your screen sharing now, and we have, as anticipated, a lot of questions about this program.
Right.
As Paul mentioned, there are sort of a number of competing programs going on, and he can really only speak right now to the PPP program. At the end of this, we're going to give some more information for this series of webinars we're hosting next week outside of our normal lunch and learns that will be on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Going in much more detail into all of the other programs that are available. But for now, let's see, let's start at the top. Lost him here in the chat. Okay, question number 1. Would reserves in our bank account make us ineligible for the PPP? Does it take into account how much money you have on hand, or is it simply just based on payroll amount?
It's just based on past payroll. You don't have to have a certain amount. And it's not asking for either organization or personal guarantees going forward.
All right.
Aaron,
Next,
how do I close this? I want to close this, but I'm having trouble closing it for you.
it should be the screen share button where you started it on the bottom, I
My screen
believe.
share was on the bottom. And I'm having.
So can I stop your screen share?
What was she saying about host controls? That sounds interesting.
Absolutely.
Oh, wait a
Where is
second.
the button that says stop somebody else's screen sharing?
So Paul, while you're thinking about that, for the nonprofits, it's for under 500 employees, right?
This is for small business, correct?
Yeah, and it's not for organizations that are fiscally sponsored, as I understand. I think.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. We're definitely hearing your best friend right now is your banker.
Without a doubt. Yep.
They're keeping up with the
starts with the
changing.
banker.
There's so much that's changing so fast, and you want to get in the queue if you're interested, and your bank will help you do that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Regina. It is absolutely changing on a daily basis. It's in a lot of flux. And so you want to stay on top on a daily basis. The reason I want all of the organizations to reach out to their banker is you want to get the process going, because there is only even though it's a huge amount of money, it's a set amount of money. And when the money is gone, they will stop processing applications. So I want organizations to start the process, because it'll take a little while before you get to that, okay, are you really signing for this repayable loan? But if you don't get it started, you're just going to be that much further behind.
Makes sense. What about organizations that already had to furlough or reduce employee hours? Are they still eligible for PPP, or do employees need to still be employed at the same rate that they were before?
That is a great question, and it is addressed in the Act. You absolutely may have furloughed or let go employees and still are able to take advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program. But you must bring back the employees at near the compensation that they were at, and the compensation by June 30th of this year. So by 3 months from now, and certainly during the time when you're spending that loan, you need to spend it on the folks that had been furloughed or let go. So you do need to bring them back on board, but you can work the program by bringing them back on. That is allowed.
Gotcha. This may stray outside of your area of expertise, but can you apply for the PPP loan and other loans at the same time? And on top of that, can you talk to multiple banks, or should it really all be through one institution?
Great questions again. You may have multiple loans, but you may not be borrowing for the same costs. So if you have other loans with the SBA or other organizations, you can't be using those loans to pay your payroll for the 2 months that you're using the PPP. It has to be dedicated to that. So there's no, in effect, sort of double dipping or duplicate loans for the same cost. But you can have loans that cover other parts of your cost structure. That is allowed. And what was the second, Aaron? Second part of the question?
One bank versus multiple banks.
I am highly recommending you start with the bank you have, and here's why. The other banks are very loath to take you on as a new customer just to do this loan program. You probably won't hear that publicly, but that's the reality. The banks are doing this because they have to and they want to be good citizens, but they're going to lose money on this program. They can only charge 1% on the loan itself. Banks are having to set up infrastructures to support this. It's way outside what they normally do. And so they're going to prioritize their existing customers first. And that's what we're seeing in this sort of day one of the chaos is they're saying, hey, we're going to focus on existing customers for right now. I believe many banks will only focus on existing customers. So we're going to see as it shakes out over the next few days if that changes, and if there are any kind of night-wide organizations that say, hey, we're willing to do this with you, but it's going to take a little while for that to shake out.
Makes sense. Is this for full-time employees only? Part-time employees included? Does it not matter as long as they're paid employees?
It's a little murky, and there's still some questions around that, and that's why you need to talk to your bank, because banks may require different things. In reading the act, it did just apply to full-time employees. The key thing here is you have to have documentation of wage or salary expenses. So whatever that documentation might be has to be acceptable to the bank, and they will be forwarding that to the Small Business Administration. So there is no requirement that it be a full-time employee, but you have to be keeping good records. Then you have to go see what the bank is requiring, either whether it's an employee or independent contractor or part-time, et cetera. But don't let that discourage you. If your employees are in that camp, just start to gather that cost information, but start with the bank in terms of what are they going to require.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then James just mentioned that the CARE Act states that all employees qualify, part-time and full-time, but it sounds like banks might be a little bit choosier. Which gets to another question about sort of the lender side of this. Somebody mentioned that they already filled out the application, but their ED is a little bit worried that on the lender side, they're going to end up needing to provide more documentation. That it seems really simple and transparent, but it may not end up being that way. Can you speak to that?
Yes, that's absolutely going to be true. There's going to be additional documentation. There's a little there is a little freak out going on. You can imagine right now the Small Business Administration sends a 2-page form and says fill this out and get going. That is the beginning of what you need to apply for. The banks are asking for additional information that's not on that 2-page form. For instance, there's nothing on that form that documents what your actual payroll was. So you need to demonstrate to the bank in something recognized that these are actual payments that were made to employees or to contractors. So at the very least, they're going to ask for payroll. And let me just look at my East West Bank form for a second. It's a very simple form, but it is in addition to what was in the SBA 2-pager, which breaks down payroll into a few different categories that they want to see, and they want to see a January to December, and then it automatically calculates a monthly average. So each of the banks is going to require something like a spreadsheet and documentation that go along with it. So there will be additional documents that are requested.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's Jasna here is mentioning that banks will require 2 years of tax returns, payroll records, incorporation documents, and probably just additional materials like that.
Yes.
But again, dependent on each bank.
Yes, and that's a great point, Aaron. It's because it's been so bottoms up. There's not a standard right now in place beyond the 2-page application that each bank is following. So each bank is trying to figure this out quickly, and so it's a little bit of a Wild West right now.
Yeah. Here's a good question too. If a specific staff member's salary is already covered by a pre-existing grant, does their salary still qualify under the PPP loan?
Wow, that's a great question. I would be more, well, that's a great question. I think you've got to talk to your CPA or someone who's really, or your accountant. I don't want to speculate on that because I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say it's okay, but I'm a little nervous. Where it's not okay is if that person was covered by another loan from the SBA or another grant from the SBA. That would, they're sort of explicitly saying we don't want double dipping on that. But if the payment is coming from another source, gosh, I'm a little nervous about that one, to be honest with you.
All right, that's a good question then.
Very good question.
Is the application through SBA standard for all banks, or are banks going to have their own application process? And I feel like we've covered this a little bit, but it sounds like everyone's going to start with the same 2-pager, and then your bank may have different information that they require.
I think that's exactly right, Aaron. I mean, that's what I've seen so far. They've taken that 2-page PDF that we all saw, And they're all requiring them to state that because that literally has to be signed by an authorized representative of the nonprofit and then sent on. So everybody's going to require that and then some additional information.
Gotcha. One more question here while we still got the time. Somebody mentioned that they're in a recess over the summer. And by May, they're going to have to pay all of their employees. If they don't get the money until then, can they still take the funds to replace what they've already paid?
That's a great question.
Really stumping you here with the
yeah,
nuances.
that is a tricky one. I don't know. My understanding of what I've read, and I've read a lot about this, is that loan, when it comes in, has to go to employee payroll. So you can't say, oh, well, I've already paid the employees, so I'm going to put it in a reserve or I'm going to put it with the nonprofit. I do not think that's allowed. You're going to need to make those payments to the employees or the part-time or the contractors that are associated with your nonprofit if you're going to expect to get paid back, or if you're going to expect to get that loan waived. So I think it does have to go out to employees, and you can't say that it's already covered.
Gotcha. I'm just scrolling through to see if there are any other things that we hadn't gotten to yet. And I think we've covered most of it. One more thing that you can maybe speak a little more to is the EIDL 2.5 calculation. It sounds like in the last couple of days, they updated the application. And so some people may have been working on the previous one, and now there's a new version that includes the loan amount calculation. Can you speak to that process a little bit more?
Yes, they're on their fourth version of that 2-page document. It literally has been changing day by day, and there's no guarantee that it won't change again next week. So it is under tremendous flux. But one thing is for sure, and that is you're only going to get a loan through a lending institution. So you really have to start with the lending institution and see what they're requiring in terms of the form that they've coordinated with the SBA and the form that they want on their own. There's a number of organizations like East West and I believe also B of A that want all this to be done online. So they're trying to really integrate what the SBA is requiring and what they require. So you've really got to start with your bank. Because it is so dynamic and it's changing so quickly, we're trying to aggregate a lot of this information on one particular website, sbaloanrelief.org. And we're literally trying to get that up right now and get continuing information on that. So if it's ready for prime time for this group and others, Aaron, I would send you that. I'll send you that link, but I want to make sure that the information is up that would help everyone.
Awesome. Very cool. It sounds like when in doubt, keep lots and lots of documentation and check with your bank for specifics. Seem to be a good rule of thumb right now.
Aaron, the only other thing I would add is we expect the banks are going to be really busy over the weekend trying to figure all this out. And so it turns that webinars that we'll be doing on Monday with the Small Business Development Corporation, so we can update you then. We will also on Thursday have the opportunity to take a pause and figure out how to do some scenario planning around your finances with the Nonprofit Finance Fund. And I know we have another webinar on Tuesday totally focused on how LISC can help answer some of these questions. So as it moves, we're hoping that these webinars will be valuable in real time. And then we'll see where we're at next Friday for our next Lunch and Learn. But thank you to Lucy and to Paul for stepping up really quick to make this information available.
Yes, and I'm sharing my screen right now just to show you guys the flyer that Regina was just talking about. So we'll include this in the follow-up email, but we're going to be going into a lot more detail on all of these programs, not just PPP next week. So we'll be having different webinars Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, each from 10 to 11 a.m. And you can register for them. We'll send around the link for that, but that'll be the Small Business Development what did it say? The Small Business Development Network will be presenting on Monday, LISC will be on Tuesday, and then Nonprofit Finance Fund will be on Thursday. So lots more financial information coming very soon. But with that, we are at the end of our third Lunch and Learn. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you very much to our speakers also. Those were both very informative. And we'll be sending around a recording of the call as well as links and PDFs for everything that were mentioned today later this afternoon. So yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good weekend, everybody.